Scary telling. I've always been fascinated by the human body and its many complexities. As a medical student, I had studied every aspect of it, from the brain to the bones. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. It was a normal day at the hospital, and I was preparing for my first surgical operation. The patient was a young man who had lost his sight due to a rare genetic disorder. The surgery was risky, but I was confident that I could restore his vision. The operation went smoothly, but when the bandages were removed, the patient's face fell. He still couldn't see. I was devastated. I had done everything right, followed the protocol, but it just wasn't enough. Days passed, and the patient was discharged. I was heartbroken, but I couldn't stop thinking about him. Then, something strange began to happen. I started seeing heat signatures. At first, I thought it was a side effect of the surgery, but then I realized that I had been given a gift. The operation wasn't successful in the traditional sense since my sight didn't return, but it left me with the ability to distinguish heat signatures, at least. It was like seeing the world in a new light, but it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. 3 weeks have passed, and I'm still not sure how to politely ask my best friend why he's room temperature. The sight of other humans, animals, and objects was something that I had to get used to. But then, something strange began to happen. I started seeing things that weren't supposed to be there. Shadows, moving objects, and distorted shapes that seemed to be following me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I started feeling a presence. It was like something was watching me, following me wherever I went. I tried to ignore it, but it just kept getting worse. The heat signatures that I had been seeing started to take on a life of their own, moving and changing without any apparent reason. Then, one night, I woke up to find a figure standing at the foot of my bed. It was humanoid, but its heat signature was different from anything I had seen before. It was like it was made of pure energy. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The figure started moving closer, and I could feel the heat radiating off it. I tried to move, but I was frozen in fear. That's when it spoke to me. It was a voice unlike anything I had ever heard before. It was cold, emotionless, and it seemed to come from all around me. It told me that I had been chosen, that I had been given a gift that would allow me to see things that others couldn't. But there was a catch. The figure told me that the more I saw, the more it would want from me. It would take my energy, my heat, and my very soul. It was like I had made a deal with the devil. I tried to resist, but the figure was too strong. It started draining me of my energy, and I could feel myself getting weaker and weaker. It wasn't until the sun started rising that the figure disappeared, leaving me cold and alone. I knew then that I had to get rid of this gift, this curse. I couldn't live with the constant fear, the constant feeling of being watched. But I couldn't undo what had been done. So now, I live my life in the shadows, trying to avoid the heat signatures that haunt me. I try to warn others, to tell them that sometimes, the things we think we want can turn out to be our worst nightmares. And sometimes, it's better to live in the darkness than to be blinded by the light. But sometimes, it's too late. Like the other night, when I saw a heat signature that I couldn't ignore. It was coming from my best friend's house. I knew I had to warn him, to tell him to get out before it was too late. But when I arrived, it was too late. The heat signature was gone, and so was my friend. All that was left was a note, written in his handwriting. It said that he had seen things that he couldn't explain, and that he couldn't take it anymore. I knew then that the figure had claimed another victim, and that I was next. I tried to run, to hide, but I knew it was futile. The figure was too powerful, and I had given it too much already. So now, I sit in the darkness, waiting for the figure to come for me. I can feel it getting closer, draining me of my energy, my heat, and my soul. But I won't go down without a fight. I'll resist until the very end, and maybe, just maybe, I'll find a way to break free from this curse. But for now, all I can do is wait, and pray that the next heat signature I see won't be my own. Back against the door, desperately trying to keep the voracious dead out, I looked in the mirror. My reflection raised his hand in goodbye and smiled sadly, never to be needed again. It had started like any other day. I woke up and got dressed, heading to my job at the local hospital. But something was off. Patients were coming in with strange symptoms, and their conditions deteriorated quickly. Before we knew it, the hospital was overrun with the undead. The staff tried to evacuate, but we were too late. The horde had already broken through the doors and started to feast on the living. I found myself running down the hall, chased by a group of hungry corpses. I ducked into a room and locked the door, but I knew it wouldn't hold for long. I had to find a way out. That's when I saw the mirror. It was an old antique, with ornate gold leaf and an oval shape. I had never really paid it much attention before, but now it seemed to glow with an otherworldly light. I stepped closer, my heart racing. And that's when I saw my reflection. But it wasn't just me. It was like looking at an alternate version of myself, one who was calm and collected, even in the face of the undead horde. "Come with me," the reflection said. "I can help you escape." Without hesitation, I stepped through the mirror, and everything changed. I was standing in a lush forest, with trees stretching up to the sky. The air was fresh and clean, and I felt alive for the first time in days. But the peace was short-lived. The reflection warned me that we had to keep moving, that the undead were still searching for us. We walked for hours, the forest growing darker and more sinister as we went. Finally, we reached a clearing. In the center was a small cabin, with smoke rising from the chimney. It was the first sign of life I had seen since the outbreak began. But as we approached, I felt a sense of unease. Something was wrong. The door creaked open, and an old woman appeared. She looked kind enough, but there was something off about her smile. "Come in," she said. "You're safe now." But the reflection shook his head. "Don't trust her," he whispered. "We have to keep moving." I hesitated, torn between the safety of the cabin and the uncertainty of the forest. And that's when I heard it. The sound of moaning, coming from somewhere nearby. The old woman's smile grew wider. "I see you've met my friends," she said. "Don't worry, they're harmless." But the reflection knew better. He grabbed my arm and pulled me towards the door. "We have to go," he said. "Now." We ran through the forest, the moans growing louder behind us. I could hear the old woman's cackling laughter, and I knew that we were in danger. But just when I thought we were safe, the reflection stopped. "I can't go any further," he said. "This is as far as I can take you." I looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" I asked. "I'm not real," he said. "I'm just a reflection of what you could be. You don't need me anymore." And with that, he raised his hand in goodbye and disappeared, leaving me alone in the forest. I ran until I couldn't run anymore, until the forest gave way to the city once again. But I knew that I would never forget the reflection or the lessons he had taught me. In a world overrun with the undead, it was up to me to find the strength and courage to survive. But sometimes, in the quiet moments when I was alone, I would look in the mirror, hoping to catch a glimpse of the reflection once more. And sometimes, just for a moment, I would see him there, smiling sadly and raising his hand in goodbye. I knew then that he was still with me, in some small way. And that gave me hope, even in the darkest of times. Because as long as I had that reflection, I knew that I could face anything that the undead world threw my way. I was always fascinated by the stories of people who would dare to take a dip in the frozen lake during the winter. It was almost like an adventure to me, to go against the forces of nature and come out unscathed. But I was about to learn that sometimes the consequences of our actions can be more than we bargained for. It was a cold winter night, and my friends and I decided to take a stroll by the frozen lake. We were joking around, taking pictures, and making plans for the weekend when we saw her. A woman was standing at the edge of the lake, staring into the darkness. We approached her, and she turned around to look at us. Her face was pale, and her eyes seemed to be searching for something in the darkness. We asked if she was okay, but she just looked at us with a blank expression. Suddenly, she took off her coat and jumped into the frozen lake. We were shocked and called out to her, but she just kept swimming deeper and deeper. I knew I had to do something, and I jumped into the water after her. The coldness hit me like a ton of bricks, and my body went numb almost instantly. But I kept swimming towards her, and when I finally grabbed her in the darkness, I swam back to the surface. It never occurred to me how fast the ice could freeze over. As I broke through the surface, I realized that we were trapped. The ice had frozen over, and there was no way out. My heart sank, and fear began to take over. The woman was still unconscious, and I knew we had to act fast. We tried to break the ice, but it was too thick. We shouted for help, but no one seemed to hear us. As the night went on, the coldness became unbearable, and we knew that we had to keep warm. We huddled together, trying to stay alive. Hours turned into days, and we were still trapped. The woman was still unconscious, and we were running out of food and water. We knew that if we didn't get out soon, we would die. But then, something strange began to happen. The woman started to talk in her sleep, and her words sent chills down my spine. She was talking about a dark figure that had been following her for weeks, and how she had come to the frozen lake to escape it. I didn't know what to make of it, but I knew that we had to get out of there. We tried everything we could think of, but nothing worked. It wasn't until the fourth day that we were finally rescued. By then, it was too late for the woman. When I got back to my life, I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was still following me. I felt like I was being watched, and the nightmares that haunted me every night didn't help. It wasn't until a few months later that I found out the truth. The woman we had tried to save had been possessed by a demon. It had been following her for weeks, trying to take over her body. When she jumped into the frozen lake, she was trying to escape it. But in the end, it had claimed her life. That's when I realized that sometimes the things we fear the most are the things that we can't see. The demon had followed me back to my life, and I knew that I would never be the same again. Being buried alive was bad enough. Realizing I wasn't alone in my own grave was worse. I had been walking home from the bar late at night when I was attacked from behind. The last thing I remembered was a sharp blow to the head, and then everything went black. When I woke up, I was buried alive in a small, cramped space. The air was thin, and I struggled to breathe. I tried to move, but my arms and legs were tightly bound. Panic set in, and I started to hyperventilate. That's when I heard a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again. It was coming from somewhere nearby. I strained to listen, and I could make out the sound of a woman's voice. "Help me," she whispered. "Please, help me." My heart raced as I realized that I wasn't alone in my grave. There was someone else with me, and they were still alive. I tried to speak, but my mouth was covered, and I couldn't make a sound. I started to thrash around, trying to break free, but the ropes only dug deeper into my skin. The woman's whisper grew louder, and I could hear the fear in her voice. "Please," she begged. "Get us out of here." I knew that I had to do something. I had to get us out of this grave before it was too late. I started to focus on my surroundings and realized that I could feel the soil around me. It was soft and moist, and I realized that I could use it to my advantage. I started to dig with my fingers, clawing at the soil and pushing it away. It was slow going, but I was making progress. The woman's whisper grew louder, and I could hear the sound of her sobbing. But then something else joined the chorus. I heard a man's voice. "Don't bother," he said. "We're not going anywhere." I froze, my fingers still buried in the soil. I had been so focused on the woman's voice that I hadn't heard the man's. I strained to listen, and I could hear the sound of movement. The man continued to speak. "We've been down here for days," he said. "We're going to die down here, just like the others." My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what he was saying. Others? How many people had been buried alive in this spot? And why? As I dug deeper, my fingers hit something hard. It was a wooden box, and I knew that I had to break it open. I started to pound on the lid, using all of my strength to break through. The woman's voice grew louder, urging me on. "You can do it," she said. "We can get out of here together." Finally, the lid broke, and I saw the face of the woman next to me. She was dirty and bruised, but alive. She started to pull at her restraints, and I did the same. But the man's voice interrupted us. "You should have stayed down there," he said. "It's safer down here." I turned to face him and saw a pair of glowing eyes staring back at me. He was covered in dirt and grime, and he looked like he had been down there for weeks. He started to crawl towards us, his fingers reaching out. We screamed and kicked, trying to keep him away, but he was too strong. He grabbed onto the woman's leg, and I knew that we were in trouble. But then something unexpected happened. The soil around us started to shake, and the ground above us began to crack. Sunlight poured into the grave, blinding us. I shielded my eyes and saw a figure standing above us, silhouetted against the sky. "Help is here," the figure said, and I recognized the voice of a police officer. With the help of the officer, we were able to break free from our restraints and climb out of the grave. We were rushed to the hospital, where we received treatment for our injuries. It turned out that we had been the victims of a serial killer who had been burying his victims alive in that spot for years. The man who had been in the grave with us had been one of his earlier victims, and he had been driven mad by his isolation. It was a miracle that we had been found before it was too late. We had been buried with company, but we had managed to survive. I will never forget that night and the terror that I experienced, but I am grateful to be alive. After so many years living alone in this large house, I came to a startling revelation. In this time, I had closed far more doors than I had opened. It was a habit I had developed, a way to keep the loneliness at bay. But little did I know, it was this very habit that would lead me to my darkest nightmare. One day, as I was walking down the long hallway, I noticed a door that I had never seen before. It was old and rusted, with a small keyhole and no knob. I tried to open it, but it was locked. I couldn't remember ever seeing it before, but then again, I had closed so many doors in this house that I had lost track. Days turned into weeks, and the door stayed on my mind. I tried to forget about it, but it was like a puzzle I couldn't solve. Finally, I decided to find the key. I searched every room, every drawer, and every closet until I finally found it. I returned to the door, excited to finally see what was behind it. As I turned the key and opened the door, I was hit with a musty smell that made me gag. The room was dark, with no windows and only one light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The room was empty except for a large mirror that took up the entire wall. I approached it, curious to see my reflection, but as I looked into the mirror, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was someone standing behind me, but when I turned around, no one was there. I looked back at the mirror, and there was the figure again, getting closer and closer. I tried to run, but my feet wouldn't move. I was frozen in place, staring into the mirror as the figure reached out and touched me. I woke up in my bed, sweat dripping down my face. It was all just a nightmare, I told myself. But then I noticed something strange. There was a new door in my bedroom, one that I had never seen before. It was the same old and rusted door that had led me to the mirror room. I tried to ignore it, but it was like a magnet, drawing me closer and closer. I couldn't resist, and I opened the door. This time, there was no mirror, only a long, dark hallway that seemed to go on forever. I hesitated for a moment, but then I heard a voice whispering my name, urging me to come closer. I stepped into the hallway, and the door behind me slammed shut, leaving me in total darkness. I started walking, feeling my way along the walls. The air was thick and musty, and I could feel something brushing against my face. I tried to turn back, but the door was gone, leaving me trapped in the endless hallway. Hours turned into days, and I lost track of time. I was starving, thirsty, and on the brink of madness. I could hear whispers, laughter, and screams echoing through the hallway, but I couldn't see anything. Finally, I saw a light in the distance. It was like a beacon, drawing me closer and closer. As I got closer, I could see that it was a door, a way out of this nightmare. I ran towards it, desperate to escape. But as I opened the door, I was hit with a blinding light that made me scream. When my vision cleared, I saw that I was back in my bedroom, but everything had changed. The walls were covered in strange symbols, the air was thick with the smell of burning flesh, and there was a figure standing in the corner, watching me with glowing eyes. I tried to scream, but no sound would come out. The figure stepped closer, revealing itself to be a grotesque and deformed creature. It had long, sharp claws and a mouth full of jagged teeth, and its skin was covered in boils and scars. It spoke to me in a language I couldn't understand, and I could feel its hot breath on my face. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or defend myself. The creature reached out and touched me, and I felt a searing pain that made me black out. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. The doctors told me I had been found wandering the streets, delirious and babbling incoherently. I tried to tell them what had happened, but they didn't believe me. Years have passed since that night, but I still see the creature in my dreams. It haunts me, reminding me of the doors I had closed and the one I had opened. I've tried to forget, but I know that it's always there, waiting for me to make a mistake and let it back in.